Hello and welcome to the Safe Mobility Strategy live stream here at the City of Edmonton. This is the safest way you can make contact on traffic issues virtually. Those of you who are watching here, who are with us, have made a commitment to learning about and helping build a safe way, however we travel, to get from point A to point B, and most importantly, back to point A, and the people waiting for us there. Now, back to A doesn't always happen, let's be honest. Back to A in the same shape doesn't always happen either. So far this year in Edmonton, there have been more than 11,000 crashes, more than 1,300 injuries, and 10 fatalities. You can put those numbers into the big statistical machine and draw conclusions about the hopeful trend we're on compared to this time last year. But the truth is, 0 is the right answer. More on Vision Zero in just a bit. Now, the live stream medium that we are in now that joins us is cool. It's touchless, it's virtual. But safe mobility is a very bodily thing. It's made up of policy, yes, but flesh and blood too. Now, whether your bodies are in Avonmore or Youngstown here in Edmonton, or points across the country or the world, thanks for being with us. Your time is a gift. We won't waste it. We won't waste it, I know, because we've got some really smart people to hear from and ask questions of later over the next hour or so. Now, I'm not one of those smart people. I'm Glenn Kubish. I work in the City of Edmonton's Communications and Engagement Department. I'm your moderator, but the people I am with that are with you, they're the smart ones. So, hello, smart people.
Hey, Glenn.
Jessica Lamar is the City of Edmonton's City of Edmonton's Director of Traffic Safety. She's safely working from home in the Highlands neighborhood of Edmonton. Happy lunch hour, Jessica.
Happy Wednesday, Glenn.
Laura Contini is a City of Edmonton traffic safety analyst. She practices livability in the Garneau neighborhood. Laura, hello.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
And Bill Schulteis is in Washington, D.C. Nothing much to see there these days. He is the Director of Sustainable Safety for Tool Design. Hello across the border, Bill.
Hello to all of you. What a thrill to be here today.
Now, those of you joining us live, we'll get to your questions after the presenters' 12-minute presentations. 12 minutes. I repeat, 12 minutes. Now, I may sneak in a question or two along the way, but please send your questions to us via email, would you please? The address is on the screen. It'll stay there. Okay, let's get at it. What safe mobility looks like out in the world, what we've learned in Edmonton, what we're going to do in Edmonton. That's the vital business in front of us. Bill Schulteis, Tool Design. Welcome, get ready to present. Bill, take us to the heartland of safe mobility. You've got 12 minutes, go. Make us stop and think, Bill. Okay, go.
Happy to be here today. I appreciate you inviting me on this panel. Just want to confirm that you can see my presentation. You give me the go sign, we'll move full steam ahead. Great. Pleasure to be here today. I want to talk about how Edmonton can get to Vision Zero, and it starts under the framework of our engineering ethics. Our whole profession is arranged around the idea that the engineers are responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. It's imbued in the decisions that we make and how we approach our work, and increasingly with this ethical mandate, we're having to think bigger about what these words mean as it relates to climate change, and equity goals and other public policy goals. When we look at the history of our profession, it really evolved kind of post-World War II with a focus at a point in time when we're really emphasizing motor vehicle traffic. And I think we've all come to get used to the idea that it's important to try to minimize delays, and a lot of our profession's focus has been trying to deal with that one challenge of, on the one hand, encouraging everyone to own a vehicle to get from point A to B, and then the inevitable result is the congestion that results from those choices. And it really comes from this idea of inside-out design. Like, that philosophy of focusing on one mode starts with the premise that a lot of people are going to drive, or everyone's going to drive. And so you think about how many people need to move from point A to B. And I think, as Glenn really well put it in his opener, this getting from point A to B is really important, but there's also what happens to the people living and working on those corridors as you are traveling from point A to B, that our decisions impact them as well as others. We've gotten into a habit of talking about improving. Every project's going to improve it, but if we're not careful in the way we think about that language, the improvement for one person could be harmful to another. This example from Toronto shows that over time, you can see the focus has been on moving more and more traffic at the expense of minimizing the pedestrian space. And because this has occurred over a period of decades, we've created a culture of auto dependency that I think we take for granted. And it impacts the perspectives that we bring to our work, to our public meetings, to the things that we're looking to improve our lives. And there's an aspect to it that I think makes a lot of sense, that if you take all of your trips in a vehicle, your perspective on transportation is what's in front of you, what's behind you. Often that is seeing other vehicles. It may feel congested. You may not feel you have much freedom of movement. But if you're able to extract yourself from the vehicle and look at the roadway over a longer period of time, you may be surprised how many of our streets are actually empty a lot of the time. And that's your very real experience of being in a busy environment for a period of time on that road doesn't reflect the reality of how that road operates. That perspective can also influence other professionals, including our friends in the fire department, whose number one job is to get to to respond to emergencies and as fast as possible to save lives. Very, very important job. But the irony is that about half of the crashes that the emergency responders are responding to are crashes between motorists on roads that have been over-designed for their movement. Cities are recognizing a need to dig deeper into how we think about data and what the implications are for the society. We're finding that a very, very high percentage of crashes are occurring on a small percentage of our streets. And that this is showing up in city after city, and it shows up in Edmonton as well. And that we have to think about other things besides just the safety of the people in transportation. What are their impacts on the larger society? And our transportation environment has a large impact on our society and its health. We know that cultures that have a high rates of walking, biking, and transit in their cities, in their countries, have very low rates of obesity, and that cultures that are very car dependent have much higher rates of obesity. We also know that 20% of all emissions from trucks are from trucks and vehicles that contribute to greenhouse gases. So if we are going to address the climate emergency, we have to be less auto dependent. So what is Vision Zero? Glenn said, we shouldn't have any deaths. And that's Vision Zero is a program that originated out of Sweden in 1997. And it really has the premise that it's unethical to create a situation where fatalities are a likely outcome of a crash. And it really reflects and comports well with our engineering ethical mandates to look out for the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And Sweden has shown results that since they've adopted this philosophy, they've dropped crashes 30% and fatalities 30%. It's also recognizing that a safe system philosophy, which underpins Vision Zero, is understanding that human beings are not perfect. We make bad decisions, we make mistakes, and that a system of transportation should account for those facts and make sure that when people make a bad decision or make a mistake, it isn't fatal. So what can we learn from our peers and other countries around the world and other cities? One, and I think this is so amazing, is that it's achievable. There's some that think Vision Zero is not achievable. And I think Oslo and Helsinki have shown that in fact, it is achievable. And they are cities that are very similar in size to Edmonton. Also northern climates similar to Edmonton. Another remarkable fact that comes from this focus in those countries on Vision Zero is they achieved last year a situation where no children died in the entire country under the age of 16. That is remarkable. New York City was the first North American city to adopt Vision Zero. They have systemically been implementing project after project throughout the city. They've been focusing on those high injury corridors, and they have dropped pedestrian fatalities 42%. And also, a safer city for people walking is a safer city for everybody. All traffic fatalities have dropped 26%. How will Edmonton get to zero? One, it's focusing on complete networks for everybody, no matter how they travel. 2, focusing on safety and design. Every decision that's made as a designer can have an impact on future safety outcomes, and that there are many situations where there's multiple complementary solutions that can be brought to a project. 3 is linking all of these safety initiatives to your livability goals, your larger community goals, your climate change goals. So let's look at these a little bit deeper. 1, I think we need to acknowledge that if you own a motor vehicle, you've been fully accommodated. You can drive from point A to B anywhere in your city with relative ease. You may not be able to make the trip as fast as you would desire in all circumstances, but you've been fully accommodated in the transportation system and network. What we need to focus on moving forward is making sure when you make that trip by automobile that you are safe, that your passengers are safe, and also that the people outside your vehicle are safe in the terrible event that you are in a situation where there is a crash. We need to focus on creating a network that accommodates people walking and biking and taking transit throughout the city of Edmonton to complete the networks. There are a lot of gaps in those systems. Making sure that they are complete should be a top goal. It's something that's been achieved in other cities, and that allows those cities to have upwards of 40, 50, 60% of their people take walking, cycling, or taking transit to make most of their trips in the day. And that has a dramatic impact on the quality of life. And it has led to huge reductions in crashes in their systems. We also need to recognize that a high percentage of our population is too young to drive, too old to drive, has disabilities, and makes it impossible for them to drive. And there's a large equity component to this conversation that needs to be front and center of decision making. When we think about how we move, we want to make sure that they are context appropriate. It's very logical and important to allow high-speed travel between cities and major destinations. And that's what our highway system is for. It's wonderfully designed to allow people to drive at high rates of speed relatively safely. And the highway system has a great safety record. We have to now focus on the urban streets, making sure that our local residential and commercial streets have much lower speeds. It's not appropriate to be operating at high rates of speeds in residential communities. We're seeing city after city recognize this importance, and they've been passing citywide speed reduction laws to lower speed limits in residential streets. And Seattle is showing a great reduction in crashes, and more importantly, a great reduction in dangerous speeders, which is down 54%. Why does this matter? Well, let's look at it. If you're making a left turn, this is an opportunity where you're at the greatest risk of injury and even death. At 65 kilometers an hour, your chance of being killed if you're hit by a car on the side is almost 100%. So we want to think about this scientific reality and fact in our design decision making. And a way to solve this is to install traffic signals so that people don't have to use their judgment to make those left turns, wait for a gap in traffic. That leads to mistakes. That we can install left turn arrows and eliminate that crash type altogether from your system. And next is thinking about pedestrians crossing streets. Pedestrian network tends to be much more dense than a motorist network, making sure that if there's a mid-block crossing such as this, that it's been designed to allow that crossing to occur safely. Next is looking ahead to the intersection design itself. This is a really traumatic thing I witnessed on one of my field visits, not in Edmonton. I'll leave the city unnamed. But the intersection design allowed for motorists to turn right at relatively high rates of speed, in this case about 50 kilometers per hour, which the risk of death or injury is about 50% if this child was hit by that car. And so the design of this street allowed for this condition to occur. Now let's compare that to this street. The engineering at this location requires the right turning motorist to slow down substantially. And you can see that this white car, when they reach the point of potential conflict with a bike lane, which is green, or the pedestrian crosswalk, which is just behind it, the car is moving very, very slowly. So you can imagine if they were to hit somebody, the chance of them getting injured or killed is just about zero. This is an example of forgiving design that assumes people might make mistakes that will ensure that they survive when those mistakes occur. Last, let me end on this story of my own children. The streets, relatively great streets, low speed. It's got great transit, bike lanes, everyone's accommodated. It's a complete street. But what's notable, and I was quite anxious filming this, was that recognizing that my children wanted to talk to each other. They wanted to ride next to each other. That's very natural. When you look at every vehicle in this image, there's a driver and there's a passenger, and they sit side by side. Look at the bus going by. People can sit next to each other. Transportation is social. We need to recognize that in our design. My daughters were not able to ride side by side here comfortably. There's no margin for mistakes. If a driver opens their door, they would push my children into the bus. If my children were to bump handlebars because they got nervous, they could fall into traffic. That's not a forgiving design. A forgiving design would separate them from traffic, such as you see in these images here. And I think that a bicycling network in a walking city, when you see high rates of walking that's safe, when you see high rates of cycling, you know you're in a city that's going to achieve Vision Zero. It's more multimodal. You see older people on bicycles. You see people with disabilities on bicycles having access to it, or even in riding in motor scooters, as you can see here. You see young babies and children. All ages and ability are represented in these photos. This is a city that truly serves everyone and gives them the freedom to choose how they get around in a safe manner. I wish you the best, Edmonton. You're on a good path. I know you will achieve these goals.
Cool. Bill, thanks. You can stop presenting now. Bill, watching myself watch your presentation, I was engaged most and most emotionally when you showed us, the mom and daughter on their bikes, or when you spoke as a father who happens to be an engineer and not the other way around. Is that the challenge, seeing people on the move as sons and daughters and nieces and mothers and fathers and friends and not just traffic counts? And is that realistic?
It is. We have to get behind the numbers and the data, and we have to think about these are real human beings. And that it's funny. I think about my children, the freedom they have and the excitement they have when they're allowed for the first time in their lives as young children to walk to school by themselves without me, without mom. How empowering that is for them. That we need to have places where that's viable for everybody.
Cool. Bill, thanks for channeling a little bit of Marshall McLuhan there. The road medium is determined by the vehicle medium. Your audience in Canada appreciates that. Laura Contini, Chapter 2, please get ready to present. Laura's an equal parts traffic safety analyst and data archaeologist because she's done some really remarkable digging through piles of numbers and charts and graphs to give us a clearer picture of where we are now with safe mobility. From one of Edmonton's hippest neighborhoods, Garneau, here's Laura Contini. Laura?
My neighborhood be made hip, but safe mobility strategy. For the past several years, I've been responsible for research and analysis of traffic safety issues in Edmonton. We started working on the safe mobility strategy in mid-2019, and I've had the opportunity to be deeply involved in its creation. Since research and analysis is my strong suit, that's what I'm here to discuss today. Share what we learned and how we can use it to create safer, more livable streets for everyone in our city. The safe mobility strategy is being created by considering a variety of inputs, including the results of a crash and equity analysis, which I'll be talking about today, but also city policies and public engagement. We started with 5 years of crash data, looking at 2015 to 2019, and this data came from police reports and shows us where, when, and how crashes are happening, as well as some basic information about who is involved. Using this data, we've been able to determine a high injury network that shows us where the most crashes are happening in our city. We know that data can't tell the full story, So we also needed to learn about people's day-to-day experiences through public engagement. This summer, we asked Edmontonians about their experiences moving around our streets. Now that we know where all the data came from, let's talk about what it means. The crash data analysis helped us determine the behaviors, road conditions, and situations that are causing crashes on our streets. This graphic shows the top 5 causes of crashes in Edmonton, and you'll notice that drivers appear in each of them. Driver error accounts for 80% of the serious and fatal crashes on our streets. The top causes are drivers following too close, resulting in rear-end crashes, driving off the road, not yielding, running red lights, and turning left across the path of others. Knowing this, we can aim some of our interventions at these causes. You'll notice that I didn't mention speeding, impairment, or distraction. When we receive information on when and where a crash happens, we have some information on the direction and movement of people involved in the crash, but we don't receive information that would have been gained from a police investigation. So unsafe speed, impairment, or distraction is something we don't really know about in crashes. And if you think about it, if you've been involved in a crash and you're reporting it to the police, you're unlikely to say, "Sorry, officer, it was because I was on my cell phone." So we just don't have that information, and it's hard to determine. However, we do know that these issues are important contributors to crashes. Speed is a factor in every crash, and it increases the likelihood of serious injury or fatality by putting more force into the crash. We also learned who causes crashes. And one thing we hope to achieve through this work is to dispel some of the myths and misconceptions around crashes in Edmonton. So why do we put so much emphasis and focus so many resources on driver errors? What about other road users? Well, people and vehicles are more likely to be involved in a crash and also more likely to cause crashes. The columns in this graph show the number of fatal and major injury crashes for different road users. The darker shade in each bar shows how many of the crashes are caused by those road users, and the lighter shade shows how many were caused by people driving. So for example, for pedestrian crashes, in total we have about 330 crashes that had happened, but only 35% of those, shown in the darker portion of the bar, were crashes that were caused by pedestrian error, such as jaywalking. The remainder, the lighter portion, were caused by drivers failing to yield. In contrast, when we look at crashes that involved vehicle drivers, or that involved injuries or fatalities to vehicle drivers, only not even 1% were caused by other road users. And it's pretty hard for somebody walking outside of a vehicle to cause enough damage to somebody inside of a vehicle. So it makes sense, but it's something important to acknowledge. Looking a little bit more at pedestrian crashes, almost 2/3 of pedestrian crashes occur at intersections, and 75% of these crashes are caused by drivers failing to yield. The majority of pedestrian crashes are not caused by pedestrian errors. Traffic safety is a shared responsibility, and it will always be important to encourage everybody and all road users to be careful and follow the rules of the road. But it's important to understand which circumstances are causing the most crashes and who is the most at risk. This will help us focus our effort on places where we will see the most results. Next, we want to know where crashes are happening. This resulted in the creation of the High Injury Network. The High Injury Network is a mapping tool that shows us which stretches of road have the highest concentration of crashes for each mode of travel. The image on this slide zooms in on one portion of the High Injury Network. However, there are crash-prone corridors citywide that need our attention. The High Injury Network showed us that some roads are hotspots for all modes of travel, and some areas of the city, such as the city center, are hotspots for active transportation modes. We can share this information with our colleagues across the city to help them prioritize their programs to focus on the areas with the most need. In addition to identifying the roadways that have the highest crashes using the High Injury Network, we also identified high crash neighborhoods. We identified the 15 neighborhoods where the most serious injury or fatal crashes occurred in 2015 to 2019. Identifying high crash neighborhoods is an important first step to understand potential differences in risk that we face. 10% of Edmontonians live in these 15 neighborhoods, and if exposure to crashes was distributed equally, 10% of different equity-seeking communities would also live in these high crash neighborhoods, but that's not the case. Here you will see we overlaid the high crash neighborhoods shown in red outline over top of low-income neighborhoods shown in dark blue. Through this, we found that low-income neighborhoods tend to experience more crashes. Using similar analysis, we also found that Indigenous people and linguistic minorities are also exposed to a higher number of fatal and major injury crashes by virtue of where they live in Edmonton. During public engagement, we asked people to drop pins on a map of the city to tell us where and what their concerns are. On the map, drivers traveling at unsafe speed was the biggest concern for people motorcycling and using mobility aids. It was also among the top 3 concerns for all road users, including other drivers. Dangerous or confusing intersections were the most important categories for people driving and cycling, and 60% of the pins submitted were for locations where people felt unsafe walking. We heard from survey respondents that the feeling of safety is perceived differently based on mode of travel, use of mobility aid, and gender. The results are reported based on a total of 1,882 respondents. 63% said that their mobility or feeling of safety is influenced by their identity. On the slide, the yellow indicates people who reported feeling safe. The gray area shows where people felt neutral about their safety, and the navy blue represents people who feel unsafe moving around the city. You can see that men tend to feel more safe than women for all modes of travel. And when people were talking about how their mobility is impacted by their identity, they're most often mentioning walking or taking transit. When we talk about the goal of Vision Zero, we focus on the most serious crashes. We don't expect to eliminate all crashes, but we need to prevent the ones that result in fatalities or major injuries which require hospitalization. So the colors in this graph show the breakdown of crash severity for different road users. Fatal and major injury crashes are shown in the dark red. If you look at the total number of crashes reported in Edmonton, people walking and riding bikes are more likely to suffer serious or fatal outcomes than people who are traveling in a vehicle. Vehicles act as a protective shell for the occupants inside, and less than 1% of crashes between motor vehicles results in a fatality or major injury. Most result in property damage only. In contrast, 25% of crashes that involve a pedestrian will result in a death or severe injury. And this is why we focus so much on vulnerable road users. So I've talked a lot about what we know and what we've learned, but I want to talk a little bit about what we don't know. Comparing the number of survey responses across neighborhoods helps us to understand who we are or aren't hearing from. We're learning that we don't always hear from people in communities with the highest crash exposure. We're missing voices from people who don't use 311, may have limited internet access, less time, energy, resources, and connections they need in order to communicate their concerns to the city. Improvement assessments are often driven by complaints, and this is not an equitable approach to working. We need to connect with partners and organizations who serve vulnerable road users that we don't typically hear from. We also have gaps in our data. Although we gain a lot of information from crash reports, they can't tell us everything. Crash reports are only created if a motor vehicle is involved, if it was reported to EPS, and if it had a certain amount of damage. We have a lack of data for non-vehicular crashes, such as pedestrians being struck by an e-scooter rider, for example, or if a cyclist hits a pothole and it's injured falling off their bike. We also need to understand where and when people are choosing to walk, ride their bike, or drive. This information helps us understand the relative safety risk between locations. Through some of the actions in the strategy, we hope to expand the information we have through new monitoring technology or data sharing partnerships. So I'd like to finish with some good news. We've gone through a lot of information on where crashes are happening, but I also want to note that the data has shown that we're making progress. Since 2015, serious and fatal injuries involving drivers have been reduced by 30% and 61% for motorcyclists. Pedestrians involved in these crashes have decreased by 10%. And although we aren't seeing the same reduction for people biking, the number of crashes has remained consistent, even though we've seen an increase in the number of bike trips, steadily increasing across the city. So that's it for me. What I've shared today is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the analysis that we've done, but I hope it'll provide some context for the decisions that we've made developing the safe mobility strategy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Laura. Tip of the iceberg. I see what you did there. We got a little bit of snow this morning. So Vision Zero will soon inevitably become Vision Below Zero for drivers in Edmonton. Laura, thanks for ending on a message of hope and good news. Now let me try to dent your optimism a bit. Impressive gains for sure over the first 5 years of Vision Zero. But is it probably true that the next 5 years or the next 5 months will be exponentially more difficult to get even another 10 or 15% improvement? Is the real work only now about to start?
We'll have to shift our work as we move forward. Where we are now, it's still possible to identify some of those hot spots, and we're still putting out some of those fires. But as we move forward, we're going to have to shift to more of a proactive approach to addressing safety. And we're learning what situations are causing risk and what we can do about it. And it'll just be a question of applying that citywide and being more proactive with our decision making. But we can get there. We can do it.
Thank you. Back to the optimism. Thank you. Laura, thanks a lot. Jessica, your turn to get ready to present. Friends watching, back before, social media made everyone an expert on everything, there was a category of people known as, what were they called? Right, experts. Jessica Lamar is one of those experts. She joins us now with a look at what's ahead in Edmonton's safe mobility strategy story. Jessica?
Thanks, Glenn. And that's an impressive title, expert. And if we're going to apply it, it's only because I'm working with some incredibly talented, passionate people at the city. Yeah, for sure. So let's dive into where we're headed. Traffic safety and our plan to achieve Vision Zero is at the heart of supporting the 4 major goals that Council set out in its strategic plan. That's called Connect Edmonton. By making our streets safer and more livable, we make Amiskwichi-Waskahian, which is also known as Edmonton, more healthy, urban, climate resilient, and supportive of a prosperous region. When we make it safer for Edmontonians to move around our city, it also generates all kinds of societal benefits: increased public health through physical activity and accessibility, a boost to our local economy, improved air quality, climate and environmental sustainability. All of these are huge livability influencers, and they help to create a city filled with streets that are easy to navigate, enjoyable to travel on, a place where we connect with other humans. Our city plan lays out how we're going to keep growing into a city of 2 million people. And while doing that, continue to shift from being a city designed for cars to a city designed for people. This is our opportunity to realize all the exciting plans put forward in the Safe Mobility Strategy. So let's start with a quick video clip that reminds me of why we're all here today. Go ahead and roll it, Ryan.
The purpose of the Safe Mobility Strategy is to reach Vision Zero through safe and livable streets in Edmonton. The principles of the strategy highlight the need for equitable safety across our city. This means everyone deserves to walk, bike, roll, take transit, or drive to their destination safely.
Hi.
We're getting there. We're in 2 countries, 5 locations.
What I don't know is if the video is playing. Okay, I think the video is not playing.
This is Ryan. The video played. You can continue.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. Okay, off we go, and I will keep presenting my screen. Sorry about that, folks. Expert in technology is maybe not one of the things we would call me. Okay, so moving on. The Safe Mobility Strategy is a modern, creative approach to achieving Vision Zero through safe and livable streets. And it's going to replace the current road safety strategy, which was written for 2016 to 2020. The road safety strategy delivered strong results using a predominantly location-based hotspot approach. Most of the dangerous intersections and streets in our city have been identified. Many of them have been treated with countermeasures to eliminate and reduce the contributing causes of crashes. The Safe Mobility Strategy is going to change the conversation in two critical ways. First, if we want to continue our progress towards zero, we need to leverage both location-based and systemic approaches. We can no longer rely on just making specific intersections safer alone. We need to shift and influence the choices and behaviors on how we move on every street and path in our city. And second, if we're going to be successful, every Edmontonian, whether a city staff person, business owner, community volunteer, or resident, needs to pitch in. The principles of the Safe Mobility Strategy are founded on the belief that everyone deserves to get to where they're going safely, and that we can only achieve that together. So the strategy sets out a roadmap for the next 5 years through the themes that we've identified. Some big buckets of work that are at the heart of what's needed to keep our progress moving. And today we're going to explore a few examples of the key actions that we've laid out for the first 2 years of the strategy. Our first theme plays off of one of the big city moves from the city plan to become a community of safe communities. It's amazing how deeply ingrained our behaviors, attitudes, and perspectives are about how we move and how much those influence our choices. This theme focuses on culture and working together to create an environment where people value improving safety and reducing risk for the people we don't even know over getting to the store or the office or our friend's house 30 seconds faster. City-imposed safety upgrades are really important, but they're not going to create this kind of culture change as rapidly as we need. Instead, this theme focuses on programs and opportunities to involve Edmontonians in the work in fun and creative ways so that we can all be part of the change. So let's look at a couple of examples about how this shows up. We've heard loud and clear that people want to focus on traffic safety in their neighborhoods, whether design challenges, poor driver behavior, a mix of both, or really any other factors. We want our neighborhoods to feel safe and to create a space that we can all enjoy. Enter the YEG Safe Mobility Makeover Program. This is going to allow Edmontonians to apply their daily experience, creativity, and energy to improving spaces along traffic safety experts. And we're going to use quick build, adaptable, and tried and true, plus outside of the box solutions to do that. Think anything from concrete curb extensions or barriers that have been painted by local artists to using slow streets or narrowing a street with a pop-up community garden box. So much is possible, and we're going to explore those options together. The second is around safe speeds as a toolkit. Speeding is a choice. Yep, there are definitely many influencing factors to how fast a car moves. But at the end of the day, every driver controls that gas pedal. And I can't tell you how much I wish getting rid of speeding issues was just as easy as reminding people of that. We want to increase the tools that are available to respond to neighborhood speeding concerns. And we want to create ways for folks to get involved. So think portable driver feedback signs, creative signage, and visuals that help people make safe choices in the moment, all in lendable, customizable by location kits that can be borrowed by communities to help make the change. Our next theme thinks about integration and consistency. So from planning to design to activation of our streets and how we maintain them, safety has to be the priority to help keep our streets safe and livable. Safety at every step means working across the organization of the City of Edmonton and with our partners to take action in response to traffic safety issues and proactively reduce exposure to risk and harm. So the actions in this category mostly fall into the design and engineering categories, but we want to go about it a little bit differently than we have in the past. A key element of the Safe Mobility Strategy is embracing Vision Zero as a citywide goal, ensuring that Vision Zero is prioritized throughout the city's transportation projects and operations, and that will help us get closer to safe streets for everyone. Tangibly, we see this being realized through consistently applying Vision Zero principles, plus things like our crash and equity analysis to major transportation projects. So for example, location prioritization for the bike plan, or planning and prioritization with our arterial renewal projects. Integration with our transit network is crucial too, as Bill mentioned. People are frequently crossing streets and navigating our transportation network to access transit stops. So we'll be conducting safety reviews for all locations, whether they exist already or if they're planned in upcoming implementation for the bus network redesign. Speaking of safe crossings, we know that improving safety for people walking, rolling, and biking means that we improve safety for everyone. We'd like to enhance the approach that we have to our current program to expand beyond its existing mandate, which restricts the kinds of improvements we can make to a very few specific measures. Safe Crossings as a program would allow us to be more flexible in considering the right improvements at the right locations. So think new signal approaches like scramble crosswalks and lead pedestrian intervals, curb extensions to narrow the distance people have to cross for a street. And of course, we're not going to forget the more traditional approaches like pedestrian signals, zebra pavement markings, and creating signage and awareness in places where it doesn't already exist. We cannot do any of this work well without listening to perspectives, ideas, experiences, learning from data and academic insight, and then taking all of that in and leading the way with purpose and courage. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is going to be for us to work together with a hive mind and a hive heart to do this work. So there's a couple of examples for us to think about, with this theme. Right now, we work very closely with the Edmonton Police Service to help keep our streets safe. Between our automated enforcement equipment and driver feedback sign data, additionally with in-depth crash analysis, we support the EPS in their work through information and insight. While we each have unique roles to play in street safety, we're so much stronger together, and this is an important focus for us moving forward. Edmonton and the University of Alberta are flush with brilliant, passionate people who are all in for Vision Zero. The Safe Mobility Strategy envisions a multidisciplinary research program that spans many different areas of focus to support holistic, integrated research that has tangible safety and livability outcomes. We really want to explore how diverse the area of our transportation network is in terms of how it connects with the way our city's designed, people's public health, how we operate as humans, how we make choices, and of course, how we engineer our roads. We all deserve to move safely regardless of who we are and how we move. But our equity analysis has shown us that there are some geographic and identity-based communities, as Laura pointed out, that have a higher exposure to crashes based on where they live, or report increased fears and anxieties than others based on how they identify. We have work to do to remove transportation-related barriers and enable more equitable safety across our city. So let's take a look at some of what we've learned and why it's important. So Ryan, over to you, and I'll wait till you tell me it's good to go again.
Through this work, we have identified the 15 neighborhoods where the most crashes are experienced in our city. 311 inquiries are an important part of our current prioritization process. Based on a review of 311 inquiries over the last 3 years, we realized we are not hearing from people who live in these communities. Our analysis has shown us that Indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, ethnic, linguistic, sexual, and gender minorities are more exposed to crashes, or are more likely to feel unsafe when moving around our city. We want safe streets for everyone, and some groups and neighborhoods need attention sooner than others. To improve safety and livability in Edmonton, we have a responsibility to focus on the places where solutions are most needed.
Video's done.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. So, As Laura mentioned, many of our systems and processes can inadvertently contribute to inequity in how we prioritize traffic safety work at the city. And I'm really grateful that the equity analysis allowed us an opportunity to reflect and identify some of those challenges. So the actions that you see under this theme really are taking a look inside to explore what we need to do to make sure that we're equitably planning work to increase safety and livability for all. We'll do that a few ways. Undertaking proactive safety reviews, not waiting to hear from people and their concerns in the high crash neighborhoods. Making sure that equity-seeking communities are identified in our project prioritization, and criteria is applied to that to help make sure that they get the action they need sooner. And importantly, we need to remember that we don't know everything. Which is not always my favorite thing to admit. We need to work with folks to establish relationships to better understand the impacts that crashes are having in their neighborhoods or in their community, and what needs to change to make things safer and more livable. And of course, that's important when we're working with anyone, but in particular, when we're working with equity-seeking communities, this is of highest priority. So there's a taste of what you'll see to come forward in the full safe mobility strategy. Vision Zero, as Bill mentioned, is not just doable, it's essential for Edmonton to thrive. And before I pass it back to Glenn, let me just quickly take you through what comes next for the strategy to become reality. Right now, we're taking a look through the feedback we received through the second round of public engagement, where people had a chance to tell us about the draft actions, some of which we covered today. It's helping us build a stronger plan, and it has some really crucial and critical considerations for us in terms of implementation. From there, the Safe Mobility Strategy will go forward for council discussion at the December 1st Urban Planning Committee meeting. And once that's been endorsed, we get to work bringing the plan to life, and that starts, well, as soon as we possibly can, but for sure by January. That's it from me. Back to you, Glenn.
Jessica, thank you. You can stop presenting now. Jessica, before we get to the questions, I want to sneak one in because I've been struck listening to Bill and Laura and to you by all the health terminology that is being used. Of course, our discussion today is happening against a very real COVID backdrop, and the radical ways we have or haven't risen to the challenge of protecting each other's physical health. So if safe mobility is seen from a health perspective, are you hopeful or depressed looking at the COVID reaction as we try to reconceptualize traffic as health?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, a both and. So one thing I know to be true here is that people can rise to the challenge. We've seen Edmontonians do that, especially over the last few months. We have identified a risk. We've given some specific things that people need to do, change, or get behind in order to make an impact. And we've seen people, by and large, live that out and really, really make an impact on their community. At the same time, I think we've seen where there's some challenges with that and how it's not always easy to see widespread choices change, behavior change, perceptions change. And so while I'm actually very hopeful because we've seen some incredible things through COVID, I'm also hopeful because I think there's some important learnings for us as we move forward to think about how do we help Edmontonians see death and serious injury on our streets as a crisis, and how do we mobilize as a united community to make a change so that we get to zero.
Thank you. Let's, with the 10 minutes or so that we have left together, let's get to some questions and answers and maybe some discussions or maybe some critiques or challenges. Let's start with a question that we have from Jim, who is watching or has told us that he's unable to watch the live event, but he'll watch it when it's packaged up and shared on City of Edmonton social media channels. He makes a good point, and Bill, I'd like you to start us off with an answer to this. My frustration with traffic flow has been on my mind for some time, says Jim. I'm taking advantage of this moment to send you a brief of my observations. I'll get those to you, Jessica. Having spent my first 15 years of driving in Winnipeg, I'm seeing patterns of behavior in Edmonton reminiscent of those 15 years of honking horns, middle fingers, road rage, and aggressive driving, all of which never existed until Vision Zero started. So, Bill, you had said that transportation is social. Jim is saying it's antisocial. He's raising an interesting possibility that Vision Zero has somehow politicized things and torqued things up. What's your take?
Well, I think it gets back to my discussion of the history of how we've evolved, and I think we have a society where we've told everyone we can fix the traffic. Every project's going to solve congestion, and then a period of time goes on and it's not better, and more people move into our cities, and it just we keep kind of chasing our tails on it. And I think what is changing in the profession now is we're acknowledging that there's limits. We can't have everyone driving a personal vehicle and expect that the system's going to continue to function indefinitely. And it's very expensive to design our cities that way. And it's harming our health, it's harming the environment, and we need to be more holistic in how we approach it. Now, that said, living through that time of change is disruptive. And I think people have expected to be able to keep moving as your gentleman suggested, and they have an expectation that they should be able to minimize their delay. And I think that the challenge moving forward is to help people tie all these dots together, to recognize if we want to be a livable community, it needs to be multimodal, that his frustrations will be greatly reduced if we can get 20% of his fellow colleagues on the road to choose a different mode of travel. And I think even COVID, as awful as it's been, we have entire large Fortune 500 companies now saying work from home is going to be a permanent element of our future. And so I think we have a chance that if I'm working from home and we've designed our entire society around driving to work trips, well, there's a lot of other trips that we've ignored in that approach that now are probably walk or bike trips because you're at home. Now you want to go walk to the store for lunch to meet a friend when COVID's over. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking maybe more holistically about all the trips that are part of our ecosystem in the future.
Jessica, do you want to chime in on this feeling that things out there on the roads are increasingly antisocial, unfriendly? Are you noticing that? What can be done?
Oh yeah, let me add it. This one's really important to me. One of the big premises that we have built into the safe mobility strategy is that Edmonton streets are for people. That, because we've had a city that has been in the past designed for cars, we've forgotten that it's Edmontonians and the people who are moving around our city that these streets are for, regardless of their mode. We have to get away from this idea that roads are for vehicles only. And I think as we start to shift, and we're seeing some important progress across the city where we're making changes to make sure that all modes can safely move on our streets, we are starting to see some of the pressure of that because we haven't been having that conversation as a community as deeply as we need to help people come along on that change. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of, cultural aspects built into the safe mobility strategy, because it's our understandings, our behaviors, it's our perceptions that influence how we act just as much as design does, just as much as signs on the road do, just as much as enforcement can. So we really need to pick up that part of it and get to a place where I care just as much about whether Glenn's speeding in front of my house as I do if he sped in front of Laura's house, which I know he would never do. But we're at a place right now where we're not as invested as we need to be in other people's safety. And I think part of our goal is to help get there through the strategy.
Hey, Laura, what's the biggest myth that the numbers that you have looked through have dispelled? Maybe it wasn't a myth that had captured you, but as you look back at the mountains of data that you have sifted through, and then compare that to the conversation that is out there, what's the biggest myth that your numbers dent a bit or suggest that we look at from a little different angle?
I think looking at it as a complete picture, it really highlights that there's not one silver bullet that can solve all of the problems. As you start drilling down into different situations and locations, the problems are really varied. And this idea that we can just educate away all the problems or over-engineer all the problems alone. I think that is probably the biggest myth. It's going to take a combination of all of these different approaches to really address the specific issues, either in different locations or with different modes of travel. And we really need to be careful about oversimplifying it. And it's too hard to go into all those details in 10 minutes. But I think that's being aware of that complexity behind the decision making, I think, is an important takeaway.
Hey, Bill, you said something interesting. You said a lot of things interesting, but one thing that made me write it down right away in your presentation was your reference to people not having to use their judgment, which struck me as counterintuitive, because when I'm driving a vehicle, I'm using my judgment all the time. What did you mean by designing roadways so that people don't have to use their judgment?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't implying that we want to make it so easy people can just pick up the phone and start texting and driving all the time. But I think the reality is, like, when you're judging a gap in traffic, you're going to turn left. There's 3 lanes of traffic approaching you. There's a lot of thinking and math going on in your mind. And different people have different abilities to make those judgments. When is it safe for me to turn left? And we know through research that people get anxious the longer they wait. They get frustrated, and the more longer they wait, the more risk taking they will do, and that's when the crashes start. That's just one situation for left turning drivers. You have that same situation for a person attempting to walk across the street. So that's a case where I'd like to reduce the amount of judgment and thinking, decision making. That's where engineering can create a situation where we make that easy. I actually think it can help our friend who's frustrated by some of the driving around and making it more predictable. You know, a lot of what you dig into when you talk to people is I think some people kind of anticipate, well, it's going to take me 20 minutes to drive to work or whatever. They get frustrated when one day it takes 40 or the next time it's 30 and it's not the same. And I think that's an example when you add left turn arrows, it actually makes it more predictable. Your expectations are set. Oh, I'm going to wait a little longer, but I'm not going to have to worry about getting hit by a semi. And so I will wait, and it's worth it. So this element of predictability can be very powerful for people.
Hey, Jessica, why is the Vision Zero target so far off? I mean, doesn't pushing it into the next decade remove accountability for those who are trying to make those decisions right now?
Yeah, the next decade sounds like a long time from now. It's really 11 years is the deadline that council set for us when they adopted Vision Zero in 2015. So the year that we want to achieve it by is one metric of accountability, I would say. But the one that I'm more concerned about right now is whether or not we're taking in the information we need to and listening to people and then acting with courage, acting with haste, and not in an unplanned way, but not becoming stuck in indecision or, not being totally sure that it's going to be the absolute perfect thing to do in every case. But are we making decisions as a city that are increasing safety across the board and at the same time making our streets more livable? And I think one of the things that this part of the strategy does in that is creates more mechanisms for us to understand whether we're staying accountable to that. Of course, the numbers of people who have died or have been seriously injured on our streets are the most important thing. We've made really important progress, and I'm never going to be satisfied until that number is zero. I would call it that we're still failing next year if we haven't hit zero. But I think what we're doing here is pivoting to find more ways to influence that to get there quicker. And if we can do it in 5 years, if we can do it in 4 years, I'm all in.
Cool. You talked about how quickly a decade can go by. 60 minutes have just gone by like that. That brings us to the end of our time together for now. Those are great questions. It's a wrap for now. Jessica, we've got time for just maybe a final thought from you, a final word from you. If you could bring us home safely, maybe how people could get involved in the effort if they were inspired by what they have heard today and they're feeling, what can little old me do at home to get involved?
So first and foremost, the only way we're going to be successful is if little old me at home does get involved, because every time we leave our front doors or wherever we call home, we are having an impact on people's safety and livability in Amiskwichiwaskahian. And that in and of itself, that realization, that taking up that banner is progress right there. And so for people just to take a little more time to plan a little bit more, to think about the humans that they're moving around and the impact that what we're doing has on the lives of other people, I think is the number one thing people can do to get involved. Whether you read a strategy document or you pay attention to where we're putting our dollars, that action in and of itself makes you a Vision Zero champion, and that's what we're looking for.
Cool. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Laura. Thanks again to everybody. We will see you down the road, down the lanes, down the sidewalks, down the trails as we go. Here's a look at the story of safe streets here in Edmonton. It's got Olga and Bruno in it and a bunch of pylons and some cool research from the University of Alberta here in Edmonton. Safe travels, everyone. Thanks for being with us.
Cities are amazing. To me, they're very much this extension of a larger microorganism that's living, breathing. Not only are cities designed by people, they're built by people, and they're built for people. Hi, my name is Olga Massini. Give me a second. Little traffic control. I am the Director of Traffic Operations with the City of Edmonton. Hey, Bruno. So we were faced with an interesting challenge when it actually came to physical distancing in our response to the COVID pandemic. What you see is the 28 kilometers of roadway that's been reallocated for people to maintain that safe physical distance. These urban places are really, they're an extension of our own communities and extensions of our own homes, and they're really for everybody to enjoy safely. From an engineering perspective and a user perspective, I'm really keen to understand how Edmontonians are using the space and how we can leverage the learnings from what we've done with shared streets for other safety programs.
By reimagining that space, we're making it more inclusive. We're making it a lot safer for everybody. And we have a tool that we have developed right now that can talk to how safe this particular initiative or this particular reimagination has been. My team helped with developing an image processing tool that would look at the videos and from the videos first detect if there is any movement, specifically pedestrian movement, and then based on further analytics, we were able to pinpoint exactly where they were and how much distance were they keeping between other pedestrians or cyclists. And so the first part showed that there was a huge surge of individuals using that space. And the results also indicated that there was a 24.5% reduction in the number of social distance violations. And also perhaps the highest percentage reduction in social distance or physical distance violation was observed in that location at 52.4%. And one of the things we noticed was that because of the shared space, we saw a substantial reduction in speeds for the vehicles. The shared space not only created this more inclusive environment, allowing the different types of road users to coexist, but it actually contributed positively towards the improvement in social compliance.
We were able to see from the shared streets implementation was how people were using them. These weren't geared toward one specific mode of travel or another. They really were for everybody, and everyone was using them in their own way. You know, we really got to look out for each other. We're all in this together in more ways than one, not only in the pandemic, but when it comes to road safety. When we look at cities and we look at elements like shared streets, they're really important in fostering that connection that breeds greater community. And right now, we face some really tough times ahead of us. Now more than ever, fostering that sense of community and that sense of pride and that connection with our city is more important than ever.